Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, and today I'm bringing you guys my ban list prediction for the upcoming March 2021 ban list. I'm really hoping that the ban list doesn't get dropped on the same day that this video comes out. I think that's happened to me like twice now. But anyways, I think that this ban list that we're going to be getting is going to be a lot simpler than what a lot of people are expecting. Sure, there are some problem cards this format, but we have a lot of decks that are fairly new and still have room to grow and develop, and I feel like the game is pretty interesting right now. There are a couple of problematic things that I think need to be looked at and addressed, which we are going to do with the list here. However, I don't have a ton of hits in mind. I think that my list is actually pretty realistic and feels like the type of list that Konami would actually put out, because it helps to address some of the more degenerate aspects of the game, but it still keeps the format open to innovation from these existing decks. So hopefully you guys enjoy the video today, and let's get started. So the first card that we're looking at, and the only card that I actually have banned, is True King of all Calamities. I would go over this, but I don't really think there's very much to say about this card that hasn't been talked about in every single other ban list prediction video on YouTube. It really is just a degenerate card that oversimplifies the game and makes it not really fun at all. This card definitely could have been banned on the previous list, but I think that seeing how Virtual Worlds have been able to abuse this card and even be able to put up multiples on the same turn to really lock your opponent out just makes the deck impossible to play against if you don't have the perfect hand to out it. Even with this hit, I think that Virtual World are definitely still a viable deck. They have access to level 6 and 9 synchros, and then some cool Xyz plays as well, so even with this hit, Virtual Worlds can still be an interesting and playable deck. They just won't have access to a card that has the ability to single-handedly shut off basically every other deck in the format. Next up, we have Cyberangel Benton being limited to 1. Benton is easily the most abusable card in the entire Drytron deck, with its ability to search for a fairy from your deck when it's tributed, not being a once per turn effect, which is kind of silly when you remember that you can also tribute Benton to search another copy of itself. Now with Benton, Drytrons do have access to some pretty interesting plays, most notably the ability to search for Herald of Ultimateness or Vanity's Ruler to potentially shut your opponent out of the game. I think that by limiting Benton to 1, you can really limit what the Drytron deck is able to do and bring it down to a more fair level, because then your opponent is forced to think a little bit more about what they want to search and whatnot. You can of course still use Benton's effect multiple times in the same turn, but with just the 1 copy, you'll have to work a little bit harder and revive it from the graveyard or add it back to your hand before you're able to tribute it to proc its effect once again. Now of course, the Drytron deck is still relatively new, and I don't want to hit it too hard. Drytron is still very much playable even with this Benton limited to 1, and in fact it even gets a big boost in Lightning Overdrive with the new rank 1 Xyz Drytron monster that allows you to tribute its materials for ritual summons, which is absolutely insane. Or who knows, maybe someone will find something else to use as tribute fodder for the Drytrons, like the Heretics or something crazy like that, and find new ways to abuse the Drytron strategy. But yeah, I think that the way that Drytrons play now, with Benton at 3, is just so predictable, it's boring, and it leads to an end board that feels just as uninteractive as True King of all Calamities, and the game is much better off with the power of Drytrons toned down just a bit by limiting Benton down to 1. So the other limited card that we have here is Firewall Dragon, which I guess is kind of obvious at this point. We just recently had confirmed that Firewall Dragon is going to be getting a Ghost Rare reprinting Ghost from the Past, which basically just confirms that we are getting its errated version here in the TCG, the same way that it was errated over in the OCG. This makes it so that you can only summon Cybers monsters using its effect, which makes it so much less abusable than it was before. Obviously, for a card that was as annoying and problematic for as long as it was, even with the errata, I would assume that Konami is going to want to put it at 1 first before it goes back to 3, but it's pretty safe to assume that it's going to be coming off the list either way, since they wouldn't want to make a Ghost Rare reprint something that was unplayable. Really, it's not so much a question of whether or not it's going to get unbanned this next ban list, but rather if the card is going to be put at 1, 2, or 3. So we're already on to the semi-limited cards, where we again just have 2 different cards to talk about. The first one here being Cursed Eldland. So I'm starting to see a lot of different lists hitting either Cursed Eldland or Scarlet Sanguine down to 1. But to be honest, I didn't really feel the need to hit Eldritch at all. I feel like they're a really strong engine, but they aren't broken at all by any means. I think that the big thing about Eldritch is that it's super consistent, right? Because you have 3 copies of Cursed Eldland, and then you can also banish the Eldlixirs for the trap monsters, or banish the trap monsters for the Eldlixirs. As much as the engine is really good, it doesn't do anything that I think is unfair, but rather it's just a strong engine that synergizes well with other strategies like the Zoodiac, the Dogmatica, and the Evil Twins. However, I suppose that Eldritch has been out for almost a full year, so it might be time to see it gradually phased out, though remember, it does probably still have some life left in it. Remember, even though Eldritch was reprinted itself, we haven't seen reprints of anything else from the archetype yet, so maybe they could be used as reprints to help push some sort of side set or other product. Obviously, semi-limiting Cursed Eldland isn't a big hit, but it's a way for Konami to kind of acknowledge that the Eldritch engine is really strong, consistent, and has been in the game for quite some time. I do think it's kind of funny that this semi-limit would also just be like Clifford Scout, another search card that required you to pay 800 life points in order to get the search, a card that was limited pretty soon after it was semi-limited, and we do see Cursed Eldland limited in the OCG as well, showing that it's definitely something that Konami could use to hit the archetype. Overall, if Eldritch went through the ban list completely untouched, I wouldn't be surprised, but if they had to make some sort of hit to it, my assumption would be that it's a pretty weak hit in semi-limiting Cursed Eldland, a hit that still leaves the Eldritch engine entirely viable. The other semi-limit that we have here is Emergency Teleport going to 2, which I personally think would be fine. The big deck it's boosting here is Virtual World, right? Which needs to make up for its loss of True King of all Calamities this ban list. It would be cool in that it helps to bring out Nyan Nyan or Lulu from out of the deck, which gives you that card on the field that you would need to summon other Virtual World cards out of your hand in order to get your combos going. Now, I also think that it would be cool for various combo decks that are already running Cyframe Gear Gamma, which is a really popular hand trap right now. Now, a lot of the time, Gamma is just a dead card in your hand if you don't drop it extremely early in your turn, right? But this could give those Gammas another function as combo extenders that can be summoned directly out of the deck, and it actually allows it to serve multiple functions. They would no longer just be completely dead and useless if your copy of Driver were to get banished. Now, over in the OCG, Emergency Teleport has been semi-limited since July of 2018, and I don't think it's been a problem card over there or broken the format or anything like that. So I think that assuming that True King does get banned on this list, it would be a nice bone to throw back to Virtual World players to help ensure that the deck can still function. Okay, so we are on to the unlimited section here, which is usually pretty boring. I'm not going to spend a ton of time discussing the first couple things. Obviously, True King's Return can come back to 3, and probably will. I don't know why they didn't just put it back to 3 in the first place. Heck, you could probably put Dynamite to 3 as well, and it wouldn't really do anything. The deck is kind of dead without access to those 3 copies of Dragonic Diagram and or Masterpiece. Now, putting this card and Dynamite back to 3 might get people interested in trying out the deck as a skill drain anti-meta turbo type of thing, but definitely isn't going to make the strategy meta by any means. The other unlimited card that we have here is Dolores, another thing that I think is pretty uninteresting. We finally get its errata here in the TCG with the release of the Ice Barrier structure deck, where it is now a hard once per turn effect, preventing it from being used in those weird infinite loops from before. Honestly, I haven't seen anyone talk about this card in a really long time, so unless there's some crazy hidden loop that no one is talking about, Dolores coming back to 3 is literally going to affect nobody, not even those 2 or 3 people that actually want to play Ice Barriers. Alright guys, so in terms of actual changes, that's kind of it for my ban list prediction. However, I do feel like there are some other things that I want to talk about and discuss, and that is kind of like my rationale behind not touching cards and leaving them alone altogether. So the last 4 things here that we have in the unlimited section are cards that I feel like aren't going to be touched, but also the cards around them or associated with them probably aren't going anywhere either. So first up, we have Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, a card that is fairly new, just coming out in the 2020 Megatins. Now, don't get me wrong, Dragoon is one hell of a card, right? It's kind of silly that it can win games entirely on its own if your opponent doesn't have an out to it. However, I don't think we are going to see it hit on the ban list at all. Now, from a meta perspective, there are a number of cards that you can play that will out the Dragoon, right? Such as Forbidden Droplets, you have Kaijus, you can prevent this card from hitting the field at all, such as with Ash Blossom on the Red Eyes Fusion or Impermanence on the Verte Anaconda. And we also have to remember that running this card does force you to run multiple bricks in the deck as well that don't really do anything in the vanilla Dark Magician and Red Eyes. But then at the same time, we also have to take a look at this from a product perspective, and really we only have one printing of Verte Anaconda and Dragoon, so it doesn't make sense for either of these cards to get hit now. That's not to say that they won't be hit in the future, but I feel like value hasn't really been milked from them. Now, honestly, if Ghost from the Past is successful, right, I could definitely see a Ghost Rare Red Eyes Dark Dragoon being a huge hit with a lot of players, or maybe something like an Ultimate Rare Verte Anaconda in an OTS tournament pack. From that perspective, it doesn't really make sense to me to hit either of these cards, and then also because of that, I don't really see why you would want to hit Red Eyes Fusion, because that also kills the majority of the usage of Dragoon, and also it's a hit to those Red Eyes players, which meta players won't really care about too much, but really Konami wouldn't want to hit something that directly supports such a fan favorite archetype. So yeah, I am 99% sure that we will not be seeing any sort of hit to Dragoon on this list at all. Okay, next up we have Guard Dragon LP, but I'm gonna kind of take a look at Dragon Link overall here. So obviously we had Link Cross and Dragon Buster both banned on the previous list, and I think there's a pretty good reason for that. They're both really degenerate cards that the game is better off without. Now, I do think that people just want to see changes to the list and see things shaken up a little bit. And it kind of makes sense because we've seen LP on so many people's predictions over the last couple of lists. Everyone's kind of assuming something's going to happen to LP, and so they have LP being hit and Dragon Rulers coming off the list and different things like that. However, I actually think that Dragon Link is perfectly fine where it is. It's a good combo deck that can make some really scary boards, but they still have to deal with and navigate through everyone playing hand traps now, and they don't have that single card that locks your opponent out of the game anymore that's completely unfair. Obviously, LP is a very good card in the deck, but at this point, and given the current power level and relative position of Dragon Link in the meta, I would not say that it is in need of a ban. In fact, I think you could argue that it should stay in the meta because we are getting Dragoonity support in Ghosts from the Past, and keeping LP alive would really help to sell people on the idea that Dragoonities can be good again and encourage people to crack open product. So yeah, as much as LP may have looked like a problematic card in the past, I don't really think that now is a time where it makes sense to go out and hit Dragon Link or LP or anything like that, and I would actually leave Dragon Link completely untouched. Alright, so second last thing we're talking about here, we have Dinosaurs, where I guess the main card you're looking at is Miscellaneousaurus, but I guess you could also be talking about Oviraptor or Fossil Dig or something like that. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty sure that Dinos were going to get hit on the last list. The deck was just that crazy. However, I think it's kind of clear from tournament and meta results that Dinos just aren't really a problematic deck right now. You really rarely see Dinos topping events anymore. I think that this kind of tells us that maybe Dinosaurs are a bit more format dependent, where they're like an anti-meta choice that is only good in certain formats where they have a good matchup against the best decks of the format, right? In the current format, they can't do very much against Virtual World and Drytrons, so the deck just hasn't performed. Yes, I have Red Misk, and yes, it is a crazy card, but I don't see the need to go out and hit a deck that just isn't performing. Maybe there's a chance that someone at Konami knows something and can see Dinos being a really good deck next format without True King of all Calamities running around the meta, so they go out and hit Dinos preemptively. But if I had to make a bet, my money would be on Dinos getting through this ban list without having anything hit. Alright, so the last thing we're going to talk about here, which should be pretty quick, we have the Zoodiacs. So I had a conversation with some of my friends about this deck, where they think that the Zoo engine is going to be hit because there's no reason for Zoodiac to be part of the meta anymore, right? They were already a tier 0 deck in a previous format, so it doesn't make sense for Konami to want to allow them to be successful, so they think that the engine should be hit. And I guess I understand the point, but honestly I don't feel like Zoodiac is that big of a threat or that big of a problem. They are really good, but I feel like they're just good because of Zeus and not the zoos themselves, right? And the zoos are actually pretty easy to mess with. The only extenders that they really have are Monster Reborn and then Barrage, so if you hit the normal summon, the Zoodiac component just kind of falls apart and you're left playing with like Eldritch cards. The engine itself is actually pretty fair for what it is right now, and I don't think that anything with it needs to change. Broad Bull should definitely never come back. Bringing Barrage back to more than one might make the deck a little bit too strong, but also hitting Tenki to try to hit the deck's consistency feels pretty weak, especially when Tenki made it all the way through all of Zoodiac format without getting touched. if you were to hit anything, it would have to be one of the Ixies, right? But limiting them doesn't accomplish anything, and if you outright ban any of them, the whole engine kind of doesn't function anymore. So yeah, as much as Zoodiacs are a strong deck right now, I think that all the cards from the theme are perfectly fine just the way they are. Alright guys, that is it for my ban list prediction. Honestly, I feel like it's pretty realistic, even if it is a little bit more on the simple side. It's only 7 cards that I have changing positions on the list, with only 3 of them being hits. I think that this sort of list kills a couple of the more problematic cards of the format, while still encouraging people to hopefully adapt and rebuild their decks a little bit more. Anyways guys, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure that you hit that thumbs up button for me and let me know. Also, make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys think of my ban list prediction, if it's realistic, if it's more realistic than Tombox's or not. Also, make sure you let me know what your own ban list prediction is looking like so that we can compare them when the list hopefully drops within the next couple of weeks here. Also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button to get all of the latest and greatest content from both Tombox and myself here on the channel. And until next time, guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.